Now for a review of what's making the headlines in the papers this morning, Adesua Giwa Osage in Lagos takes the charge. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, good morning, Yolanda. Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful, beautiful Monday. So let's take it away. Let's start with this day. Let's get straight into it. Above the masthead there, it says Afrexim Bank, MDGIF, signed $500 million MOU to develop Nigeria's gas infrastructure. Ryder tells us that Nigeria and Mozambique are going to raise Africa's LNG exports, or expected to, by 174% by 2034. Of course, above the masthead is a story that we've taken today, which is about Ibas, and we'll get back to that. But that Ibas is winding down his emergency rule, urges Rivers people to unite. Below the masthead there, despite agitations and permutations, Tinubu unlikely to change Shatima as VP in 2027. Now, as we remember, things came to a head in June of this year when the APC stakeholders in the Northeast failed to mention Shatima's name while endorsing Tinubu for the second term at a defining zonal meeting. Now, Shatima is from the Northeast, and it was rumored at the time that the president was picking a candidate to run with him from the Northwest in 2027. However, it's been reported from insiders in the villa that that's much ado about nothing. Benga, what are your thoughts?
Well, when you talk about the vice president, we've seen some very powerful vice presidents, and we've seen some that comes like a spare tire. But be that as it may, the Constitution makes it clear that it is a prerogative of the president to choose his running mates. So that comes to what we could on the outline as a perceived loyalty. We recall that the NEC meeting that was held last year, there was a very heated controversy on the issue of the tax policy when the bill was being contemplated at the National Assembly. And the vice president issued a statement that perhaps many people felt didn't go well with the president. And that was where the undercurrent of a kind of fallout between the two figures came from, because the president said that he understood clearly where the vice president was going. And we can also see the Northeast endorsement rally in, I think, in Northeast, where such another controversy broke out.
Yes.
But I think both parties, both figures are politically savvy, politically experienced, because the vice president, regardless of what you see, represents a key figure considering the geopolitical dynamics of a country like Nigeria. So changing it now will definitely send a negative signal to the geopolitical representation of which the vice president stands. And when you talk of politics, I will know that the president is clearly finding a desperate way to woo the Northwest, which is like the political powerhouse of the country. But be that as it may, there are some actions that has far-reaching effects. So for me, I wouldn't be surprised that the president is holding on to his right-hand man in person of Alhaji Kashim Shettima as his running mate, if that is what his plan is. But for now, it's still a bit preemptive and speculative.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Now, as you said, a lot of speculations, and I'm sure we'll still see more agitations and permutations as we head towards 2027.
Absolutely.
Now, the main story on this day this morning is that Dangote's crude imports hit 60 million barrels in H1 as Nigeria's petrol bill swells to 4 trillion naira. It says that goods valued at 18 trillion naira moved through Apapa port in Q2, and at 1.43 million barrels per day, Nigeria's OPEC oil output shrinks to a 5-month low in August. It seems that we're going forward, and then we see we're going backwards. Vimbai, what are your thoughts about this, to our ambition of achieving self-sufficiency in fuel production and also reducing our oil bills It does not seem like we're heading in the right direction with this story.
You know what? The story is a paradox because it has a little bit of good news and a little bit of bad news. So when we're looking at the bad news of it, I mean, the fact that so many of our hopes were hinged on the Dangote refinery and we're unable to supply him with the crude oil that we produce ourselves domestically. I mean, 60 million barrels in 6 months is a lion's share of crude imports, especially when you consider the fact that Nigeria as a whole in the same period produced about 266.9 million barrels of crude oil. So it just goes to show you, you know, how much oil Dangote refinery is using on his own. It also shows that the crude for Naira deal has not really yielded any fruits because that was supposed to have been able to, you know, acquire a little bit more crude oil for his production and for his benefication. However, having said that, we're also looking at a period where crude oil exports and production in Nigeria as a whole are saying to have increased. This is the best performance we've seen in a couple of years. But unfortunately, because of the general, you know, global oil shocks, cost of production of oil here in Nigeria, and then of course you also have the domestic absorption, you're seeing that we're actually losing money. We're exporting more, but we've earned 3 trillion naira less from the exports that we've put in. So it goes to show you that the culture of a monoproduct economy is certainly starting to catch up with us. However, the good news is that when you look at overall exports, you see that oil, which used to dominate and have about 70% of the share, has now reduced to about 50% of the share. Other products are now making up Nigeria's exports. This is positive because, of course, it means that we are, whether it's by force or whether it's, you know, in an unplanned, unexpected way, we are well on our way to beginning to diversify our export portfolio and to becoming less reliant on crude oil for our foreign currency tickets.
Definitely. Very, very salient points raised there. And another thing that's very important is when we talk about loans, a lot of times it's because we are actually mortgaging our crude. We're mortgaging, and so Dangote
based on forward sales.
The forward sales. So Dangote can't get the crude because the crude is already encumbered by even previous administrations sometimes. So when we talk about the repercussions of these actions and the long-term effects, we can see them even happen in real time as we're currently paying the checks for the money we borrowed before. But let's move on to the Punch. On the front page of the Punch there, it is Dangote again, and it is oil again. Above the masthead, it says Dangote deploys 1,000 trucks. Ipman rallies marketers. And of course, what Vimbai brilliantly brought up, that crude earnings fall by 3.18 trillion naira amid an output surge. But the main story there is a story that we've spoken about today and a story that was above the masthead in this day. Emergency rule, IBAS defends 6-month tenure as opposition demands probe. The pictures on the Punch there are, of course, of IBAS after the Thanksgiving service. And I know that social media was abuzz with the videos of his wife dancing at the front of the church. Wenga, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, a lot of political happenings. I think we need to stay glued to the pulpit now to see what breaks, because the pulpit is gradually turning into a news mill recently. But be that as it may, political transition on a serious note comes with a concrete process of transition, which involves a handover note and a compare note between the incoming government and the outgoing administration. We understand that the Rivers State had come under a state of emergency for 6 months, and by September 18, it will be rounding up. But we need to see some level of accountability. We know that he couldn't have run the state with an empty fund. Funds were released. So we need to see a transparent and accountable handover note where he will tell us what he met on ground and what the situation is. Otherwise, it will continue to fuel speculations, because yesterday a lot of people, there were uproar that nothing was done, and there is a need for transparency, and he needs to come out and state what he has spent and what he met on ground. So I think retired Vice Admiral Eket Ibas should come clean and let the process of transition be very transparent and accountable for everyone to see. We know that Rivers State is one of the richest states in the country. So if we would not, if you would not want this 6 months of interregnum to go down in history as a setback for Rivers State and as a question on the state of emergency being placed on Rivers State, retired Vice Admiral Iboket Ibas needs to come out to present a handover note that is full of accountable stewardship that he handled and he managed in Rivers State in the last 6 months.
If I may just jump in before you do, Adesoa, I know they said that he handed something over to the president, and I think we need to be careful about that because he's not accountable to the president. He's accountable to the people of Rivers State, and in this instance, I believe that he has some questions to also answer to the National Assembly, who he has been interfacing with throughout this process. So that process is what we would have hoped to see now, not that we'll start seeing it closer to September 18 when a new, the sitting governor, not even a new governor, the sitting governor should be resuming his duties unencumbered by whatever has been happening in the past 6 months. But on a lighter note, Gbenga, won't you dance too? You were minding your business somewhere, they called you, they said, come and oversee one of Nigeria's richest states. You know, when she was dancing, I said, Madam, me too, I'm dancing, because what the Lord has done for you.
Well, we could see that in the Thanksgiving Day, but on a matter of coincidence, it's September 15th, International Democracy Day, that talks about the need for democratic participation for all. So, nevertheless, it's an inclusive system, but the outgoing sole administrator still has that sole responsibility to tell us his account of stewardship in Rivers State.
Yes. Definitely. I'm expecting we would hear stuff from the National Assembly. I don't imagine that they would not ask him to come in.
Absolutely. We are not questioning the Thanksgiving service.
The chairman of the oversight committee there for the Rivers state of emergency. But let's move on to the Daily Independent. There are a lot of important stories there. Before we move to international news, let's bring up the Daily Independent. Now, before we go to the lead story there, I want us to talk about the FG's warning of flooding in 11 states. As we spoke earlier, those 11 states are Adamawa, Benue, Nasarawa, Taraba, Delta, Niger, Kebbi, Kano, Katsina, Sokoto, and Zamfara states. It's very important because the rising water levels in River Gongola, River Benue, and River Niger pose additional risks to people, and they're warning that everyone situated in floodplains are expected to evacuate immediately. Now, 2 weeks ago, the Northeast governors raised alarm over flooding and infrastructure deficits. And 2 years ago, we saw the same thing come from the Northwest governors. And last year, I said, I'm expecting we'll see the same thing happen this year. And it's not because I'm a psychic. It's just because in Nigeria, it seems we have the same conversations without actually putting certain things in place. So now they are expected to evacuate immediately. But I think the question is, where are these people going to go? And if are they going to put proper infrastructure to make sure that this doesn't keep happening every raining season? Yolanda?
Adeso, I think the question as well is when and how, to what you just asked. This is a great chunk of the nation. 11 states is really not a joke. We have been having this conversation over and over. I remember months ago when the rainy season was just beginning, we had a few incidents and we spoke about this as well. So it's quite unfortunate that this report is actually telling people that the flooding should begin between Sunday, which was yesterday, and Thursday this week, which is such an incredibly short notice. This is so important to highlight what we've always been talking about, you know, proactive disaster management when it comes to flooding. If you look at the screen, you know, you will see such a sad and deplorable state, houses that are submerged underwater, and now people are being asked to evacuate immediately. Why wasn't notice given in due course? I think another part of this report that is quite disheartening is the fact that the ministry also urged state governments and other agencies to provide prompt feedback and act quickly to mitigate the impact. And that brings me back to my question that I asked before. How? How is this supposed to be done in such a short space of time? And to echo what you asked, where are these people going to go? It's such a sad situation.
I think just to add to that very exciting point that Yolanda raised, I think the Constitution is clear on to have envisaged that disasters sometimes could be beyond human resolution, and that's why it's called emergency. And that is why the Ecological Fund in the Constitution provides that 2% of the Ecological Fund should be devoted to disaster management. But that arrangement need to be worked out in a counterpart funding with the subnational level. But so now, I remember that 2 months ago, the Flood Alert Agency raised an alarm that 19 states are under the threat of flooding. So that was just 2 months ago. Have we learned from the Mokwa incident where we had several dead, several displaced now, and Mokwa is under reconstruction now? Are we really borrowing a leaf from there? I think it's time for us to sift politics away from governance and embrace what governance really entails. So it is time for state governors under those 19 states and now recently under those 11 states to come out from their quietness and start giving us account of what they are doing. Otherwise, it will be a crocodile tears. I remember reading something from Vimbai recently on how the crocodile tears, how it came out, how the folklore came about. So the government at both the federal level and the subnational level needs to come out. They need to come out to show us what they are doing to avert this tragedy. Otherwise, their sincerity will be questioned.
Definitely. As you said, the government's their primary responsibility is to protect lives and the livelihoods.
Absolutely.
And what we don't want is to see another loss of life and then they're sharing rights and they're handing out cash and they're calling it empowerment. As Yolanda also rightfully said, we need proactive disaster management. We'll see what's going to happen, particularly because we do have a large population of internally displaced people already in Nigeria.
Right.
We have legislation, we even have legislation that has not even scaled through for the protection of internally displaced people. So these are the important things we should be focused on. But another huge thing is the Nigerian economy, and that is the Daily Independent's main story. 6 months to deadline, only 14 banks have met recapitalization. Now, in my previous life as an M&A lawyer, I'm sure I would have been excited coming into this season. But some banks have met recapitalization, some have not. Of course, very importantly here is that the banks are ramping up their efforts to meet the stringent capital requirements. It is part of our chasing our $1 trillion economy, and they're exploring mergers and acquisitions. They're raising fresh capital through rights issues and public offers. And the industry is abuzz with these strategic moves aimed at strengthening Nigeria's banks. So, Vimbai, how do you feel about it? Do you think we're strengthening our balance sheets right now?
Absolutely. I think this is a painful exercise, and even those who've been able to cross the watershed have done so, not with the greatest amount of ease. But however, what is important for us at the moment is to ensure that there is credibility and there is strength within the banking sector. We know how dominant the banking sector is with regards to contributing to our GDP at the moment. The Nigerian banks currently, dare I say, are carrying the Nigerian economy on their backs. So ensuring that the sector is well regulated and ensuring that there are preventions against some of the failures in the system we've seen in the past has been a great mandate of this particular administration of the CBN, and it's good to see them follow through it. So we have 14 banks and only 6 of which are publicly listed or that are available on that list. You're looking at ranging, depending on the category they fall into, from 500 billion to 200 billion, 50 billion, and so forth, and it decreases from there. But ultimately, it goes down to ensuring that we're not we're not exposed as consumers, and of course also as business and as an economy to banks that we've had a few, I don't want to call names, but we've had a few paperweight banks that have not been able to sort of withstand the pressures of time and withstand certain economic pressures over the history of Nigeria. So this is a strong move, and it's good to see that we're moving in the right direction. I'm anticipating more mergers and acquisitions because there are clearly a number of banks that are not going to be able to make it no matter what they do. So I'm looking to see which alliances are going to start shaping up in the road to the deadline.
I'm excited for the capital markets lawyers out there.
Right?
Christmas is coming early.
Bonus.
Christmas is coming early. Before we leave the Daily Independent, there is a story there that's very interesting. I would love to know Gbenga's thoughts on this. Don't dent your image by running in 2027, Sage tells Jonathan. The writer there says those asking him to run are selfish elements from Afegbua, and obedience denied, begging ex-president to step down for Peter Obi. Now, the Professor Itse Sage, who's the former chairman of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, has counseled ex-President Goodluck Jonathan to ignore those prompting him to contest in the 2027 elections. He says that he does not think Jonathan is likely to win, and it will be a mistake for him to contest. And he also said that because he is highly respected in the country and globally, he should maintain his honor because it will be a grave mistake to come back. Now, my question is for you, Gbenga. Do you think it's dishonorable for him to come back and lose? Is there any dishonor in contesting in an election and losing?
Well, it's actually different strokes for different folks. There are some people that believe that, especially when you watch towards the twilight of Jonathan's administration, it was a moment of epiphany for the administration where decisive moves were made, and we made a lot of inroads in the fight against Boko Haram and a lot of restructuring. It was a kind of awakening, and a lot of people actually felt that if this man is just starting, he would have done. All of a sudden, Reuben Abati wrote a book about the ghosts and the principalities in Aso Rock. All of a sudden, they fled him, and he was able to see, permit me in the use of word, to see clearly. And there are some other people that believe that Section 173, subsection 3, which clearly states that once you've been sworn in to complete the term of your predecessor, you stand only one term, which he had completed. But be that as it may, there was a court ruling, a federal high court ruling, that also gave him that carte blanche, that clearance to run. It shows the kind of state of defragmentation the PDP is in right now. For them to be considering Jonathan, it shows their limited choices in terms of running a race with an incumbent party. Because when you look at it, Section 84 and Section 29 of the Electoral Act 2022 is quite explicit of what it takes to run a party primaries. So I think it's in a state of this delusion that the party is. That is why they would want to take a risk of someone that has a legal question in to be their flag bearer. Yes. So when you look at the crystal ball, you might even be shocked that the African Democratic Congress might be coming ahead of the PDP in the pecking order if they don't put their house in order. So I think for Jonathan,
I mean, you did say that there's a legal question, but of course we heard that it's a settled matter whether or not he can run again.
The incurable optimism in politics.
There's a case that has already
but anyway, let's wait and see.
It's already been decided upon.
Absolutely.
And on top of that, after deciding upon the case, nobody even challenged it. Nobody appealed the ruling. So it's a subsisting judgment. But as you said, the PDP, it does show the state of the PDP. Now, let's move on to the Guardian newspaper. There's a lot of juicy stories on the Guardian, and we have touched on some of those. So if you go to the Guardian newspaper, the leading story there says that parents struggle with steep tuition hike as schools wrestle rising. The operation costs of running schools are very, very expensive. However, parents also still have to pay higher school fees, and obviously that's a very costly, very, very stressful. You know, September has come and kids are back in school now. Also, importantly, the political stories there. Shekarau's PDP chairmanship, ADA's prospects, unsettle ADC coalition, more on Fubara, and very interestingly, Akpabio, also another pulpit story. Akpabio urges Nigerians to tarry, says Tinubu's reforms with barefoot. From pulpits to front page. But let's go to the international papers now, and let's just bring up the Financial Times just to round this up. On the Financial Times here, Gen Z protests, protests in Asia are spreading. Yolanda, what are your thoughts here, considering what we have seen, not just in Nepal with their new prime minister, their first female prime minister, but of course in England, we saw right-wing protests. 150,000 people came out to protest there with the Union Jack. We've seen protests in Japan, right-wing protests in Japan, but also we're seeing protests against and it seems as an economic situation growing up across the world, and it's leading to young people to rise up.
A lot to unpack there. I'm glad you also mentioned what happened these past few days in England, you know, with the Prime Minister condemning the protesters who use the English flag as a symbol for violence. You know, for those who are not really in the know, it's actually a crime to put the British flag out, as it's deemed as a racist charge. So a lot of people were prosecuted because of that, and there was a lot of unrest. I believe a lot of police officers were also caught in the fire, for a lack of a better word. But, you know, so much is going on around the world. Just like you rightly mentioned, the protests in Nepal, which seem to be calming down at the moment. But we also have the same happening in the Philippines. Earlier, we took a report where the president was actually saying, yes, he stands with his people, because he also wants to keep politicians accountable for what they say that they will do. As well, with those protests in Asia, we have the same thing in Turkey. You know, Turkey is a transcontinental country, so it's part of Europe and it's also part of Asia. So there we had, you know, about 50,000 people that were, you know, protesting ahead of allegations of vote rigging and political coups. So I think generally around the world, people are starting to wake up and stand up to the people that lead their nations. They're starting to find their voice and realize that really there is power in numbers. As you can see on the screen, this is what happened on Sunday in Turkey and many other countries across Asia.
All right. Okay, unfortunately, our time is far spent on this. There's never enough time for newspaper review.